أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. أهلا وسهلا بكم. Welcome to the sixth lesson in our explanation of the book Bulugh al-Maraam min أدلة الأحكام. Last week we concluded the chapter Bab Mas'al al-Khuffayn, the chapter of wiping over leather socks. We learned that the condition is that the Muslim puts on the socks in a state of tahara, and we learned this from the hadith of Mughira ibn Shu'bah radiyallahu ta'ala an. We also said that wiping over leather socks is something which differentiates Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah from the Shia and the Khawarij. We had learned that the concession time begins after your first mas. The first time that you wipe over this khuffayn after you had broken your wudu, this is when your concession time starts. For how long? What period? For the musafir 3 days and 3 nights. For the resident 24 hours. What happens when the time concession ends? Is the person's wudu broken? According to majority of the scholars, yes. And also, if the Muslim removes his khuffayn during his concession period, his wudu also breaks according to majority of the scholars. We went into matters with regards to plasters and bandages and the difference between the bandage in relations to its ahkam and the khuffayn. We said that there is no time period for the bandage. There is no condition that you put it on in a state of tahara. You have to wipe over the entire bandage as opposed to just the upper portion, and it suffices you for your wudu and your ghusl. These 4 differences between bandages, plasters and your khuffayn. Today inshallah we will start the chapter Bab Nawaqidul Wudu, the 6th chapter in the book, and we will conclude it today bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But before we get deep into our explanation, 2 points of benefits that I have for you related to the seeking of knowledge. Then the first one is from the hadith recorded by Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after he had created Adam alayhi salam, he said, اذهب فسلم على أولئك النفر فاستمع ما يحيونك. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Adam alayhi salam, go to those angels in that corner and make salam to them and listen and learn and see what they reply to you. Many of the scholars in explanation of this hadith, they say that Adam alayhi salam was the first to go out seeking knowledge. He was ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to go to those angels and to listen to what they might reply to him. Wa alaykum salam. This was the reply of the angels to Adam alayhi salam. He was the first, the father of mankind, and the first to go out seeking knowledge. And on the topic of seeking of knowledge, the second benefit from the biography of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, as narrated in the book Manaqib Imam Ahmad by the scholar of Islam Ibn al-Jawzi, he says that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, he would go out from his home with his ink pot seeking knowledge from town to town. So the people would tell him, Ya Imam Ahmad, Ya Aba Abdullah, up till when are you going to go seeking this knowledge? And he replied to them, Ma'al mahbara ila al-maqbara. I will go with my ink pot right up to the time wherein I enter my grave. Ma'al mahbara ila al-maqbara. With my ink pot right to my grave. This was the zeal that the scholars of Islam had in the seeking of knowledge. And may Allah have mercy upon all these scholars of Islam. With that we begin chapter number 6, Bab Nawaqidul Wudu, hadith number 62. وعن أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كان أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على عهده ينتظرون العشاء حتى تخفق رؤوسهم ثم يصلون ولا يتوضؤون. أخرجه أبو داود وصححه الدارقطني وأصله في صحيح مسلم. This hadith narrated by Anas ibn Malik رضي الله تعالى عنه, wherein he states that the Sahaba during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they would wait for Salatul Isha in the masjid. This gives us an indication that the Prophet ﷺ would like to delay Salatul Isha. And we will come to this matter inshallah in the chapter of the times of Salah. That the Prophet ﷺ loved, and he felt that it was mustahab and better that the Muslim delays Salatul Isha. So the Prophet ﷺ would pray Salatul Isha in its latter time. The Sahaba were people of work, were people who went out and toiled on the earth during the day. They came to the masjid and they had their heads lowered. They would doze off. They would catch 40 winks, as we would say. And what would happen? The Sahabi would doze off. When the Iqamah would be given, he would wake up and perform his Salah, as Anas radiallahu anhu states. وَلَا يَتَوَضَّؤُونَ. They would not take a fresh wudu. This shows us and brings us to the mas'ala of what happens if the Muslim sleeps. Is sleep something which breaks his wudu? Then the scholars have differed in 3 opinions with regards to this matter. The first opinion, that all types of sleep break your wudu, whether it is light, whether it is for a short period, whether it is deep sleep, whether it's for a long period. Every type of sleep breaks your wudu. The second opinion is that sleep does not break the wudu at all, and this was the opinion of a few scholars from the history of Islam. But in reality, the strongest opinion based upon this hadith is the third opinion, wherein the scholars state that light sleep does not break the wudu. As long as you have consciousness of whatever is going around you, whatever is happening around you, then this would be regarded as light sleep. But deep sleep, istighraq fi nawm, deep sleep, this is something that breaks the Muslim's wudu. And this is the strongest opinion, inshallah, based upon this hadith, that these Sahaba, they would lower their heads. This was not deep sleep, this was light sleep in the masjid, and they would stand up and complete their salah and perform this salah. So from this hadith we gauge that deep sleep is something which breaks the wudu, and light sleep does not break the wudu. What happens to the Muslim who loses his aql, zawal al-aql? He might be intoxicated, he is unconscious. These also fall within the parameter of the person losing his mind, losing consciousness. This is also something, by consensus of the scholars, something which breaks one's wudu. Hadith number 63. وعن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت: جاءت فاطمة بنت أبي حبيش إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالت: يا رسول الله، إني امرأة أستحاض فلا أطهر أفأدع الصلاة؟ قال: لا، إنما ذلك عرق وليس بحيض، فإذا أقبلت حيضتك فدعي الصلاة، وإذا أدبرت فاغسلي عنك الدم ثم صلي. وللبخاري: ثم توضئي لكل صلاة. Hadith number 63, dealing with the topic of the female who is in the state of istihada. Then remember, the bleeding that the female undergoes are of 2 types. The first, her normal menstruation, which we would term hayd. What are the characteristics of this type of bleeding? Then some of the characteristics are that the blood of menstruation has an odor attached to it. It is very, very dark in color. It is associated with pains, and it has, as we mentioned, an odor attached to it. Whereas the blood of istihada, this is due to the female having some sort of sickness. The color of the blood is normally red, and there is no odor attached to it. And this is due to her sickness and not due to her menstruation. So what happens when she has this sickness, where she has this chronic bleeding? Is it something which breaks her wudu? Then the answer is as stated in this hadith. Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh came to the Prophet ﷺ and she asked him, what do I do if my bleeding does not stop? This bleeding of istihada, it is continuing for entire months after months. What do I do? Prophet ﷺ answered her, La, do not leave off your salah, do not leave off your fasting. That istihada is not something that makes your fasting haram, is not something that makes your salah haram. Your husband can sleep with you while you are in the state of istihada, as opposed to hayd and menstruation. So the Prophet ﷺ told her, La, do not give up your salah, do not give up your fasting. فَإِنَّمَا ذَلِكِ عِرْقٌ وَلَيْسَ بِحَيْضٍ. This is due to some sickness and it is not menstruation. When your menstruation comes, those days of menstruation, then give off salah. Do not pray your salah, do not fast. And when your menstruation ends, take a complete bath, take a complete ghusl, and start your salawat and start your fasting. Although you have this chronic bleeding is not an excuse. You have to fast and you have to pray your salawat. Then the Prophet ﷺ, in the narration recorded by Imam al-Bukhari, he states, ثُمَّ تَوَضَّئِي لِكُلِّ الصَّلَاةِ, and take a fresh wudu for every single salah. And this is the point of proof from this hadith, that the female in menstruation, at the time of Salatul Dhuhr enters in, let's say for example at 1 o'clock. She takes the fresh wudu, she prays her sunnah salawat, she prays her fard salat and her nafil salat, she recites from the Quran, and then she moves away. During this period, she has this bleeding, this chronic bleeding of istihada. When the time of Salatul Asr enters, she should take a fresh new wudu and perform that salah. For every single salah, she takes a fresh wudu based upon this hadith, the hadith of Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh. This hadith also gives us an indication that the women of the Ansar, they never allowed their modesty from preventing them from asking questions. Even if it dealt with istihada and menstruation, they never let their modesty prevent them from coming forward and asking the Prophet ﷺ these personal questions. And that's why Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha said that, may Allah have mercy upon the women of the Ansar. They never let their modesty prevent them from seeking knowledge. The next hadith, hadith number 64. وعن علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله تعالى عنه قال كنت رجلا مذاء فأمرت المقداد أن يسأل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فسأله فقال فيه الوضوء متفق عليه واللفظ للبخاري. We've already dealt with sleep, whether it breaks the wudu or not. We said that deep sleep breaks wudu, light sleep does not. The female in the state of istihada, she should take a fresh wudu before every salah. What about madhi? What happens to the Muslim male who is in the state of arousal? Is this something which breaks his wudu or not? There is release of pre-cum. Does this break his wudu? And the answer is yes. Based upon this hadith, that Ali radiallahu ta'ala anh, he was a person, rajulan madha'a. He was always in a state of arousal. So he sent Miqdad to ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what happens in this state? Is it something that requires me to take a ghusl, like semen? Or is it something that requires me just to take a wudu, like bowl or urine? Then Miqdad radiallahu ta'ala an asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the answer was, fihi al-wudu, that there is no ghusl involved here. All you need to do is take a fresh wudu. Why did Ali radiallahu anh send Miqdad to ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Out of his modesty. That he was married to the daughter of this mufti. So he didn't feel it appropriate that he comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asks this question. But did he just relax and sit back and say, well, I will not ask? La. He sent Miqdad to find out because it was very, very important. And subhanallah, in the narration of Abu Dawood, that Ali radiallahu ta'ala anh, before finding out, he had no knowledge on this matter. So what would he do? He would take a ghusl every single time that he had this release of pre-cum. And he would say that on this winter days, in Shita, he would go out and take a ghusl until he felt it a burden upon his body. And then he sent Miqdad radiallahu anh to ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the answer was that there is only a wudu and there is no ghusl required. The scholars also mention the matter. What is meant by fihi al-wudu and ighsil dhakarak? In some narrations, the Prophet ﷺ said that wash your private organ. Is it that I just wash the head of my private organ? Is it that I wash the entire private organ? Or is it that I have to wash the private organ and the testicles? Based upon the hadith recorded by Imam Abu Dawood, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, and this is the strongest opinion insha'Allah, that the Muslim is bound to wash his private organ and the testicles. اغسل ذكرك وأنثيي, that you should wash your private organ and the testicles, and that is the strongest opinion, inshallah, based upon the hadith recorded by Imam Abu Dawood. This hadith is also proof the fact that the Prophet ﷺ ordered them to wash off this madhi, remove it, have it removed and wash. This is proof that madhi or precum is something which is totally najis. We already went through this issue in the previous chapters. We said that the release from the male private organ are four. Number one, urine, which is totally najis. Number two, semen, which is tahir according to the strongest opinion. Number three, madhi, as mentioned in this hadith, precum, it is also by consensus of the scholars najis. And number four, something we term wadi, a release that a male might have after release of urine. This also follows the ruling of urine, and it is najis.